The night someone leaves you in the rain is the night you stop belonging to your past. The rain had started as a whisper against the pavement, a soft tapping that might have gone unnoticed if not for the way it clung to Emily Carter's skin like something deliberate, something personal, and now it poured without mercy, soaking through the thin fabric of her dress, turning it heavy, cold, impossible to ignore. But she didn't move, not when the car door slammed, not when the engine roared to life, not even when the red glow of taillights stretched across the wet street and then disappeared completely, as if he had never been there, as if she had imagined the last 5 years of her life. Her fingers hung at her sides, trembling, not from the cold, not entirely, but from something deeper, something quieter, something breaking in a way no one else could hear, because he hadn't shouted, he hadn't argued, he hadn't even looked back. He had simply left, like closing a door on a room he no longer needed, like discarding something that had lost its purpose, and somehow that silence hurt more than anything else ever could. Emily blinked slowly as water streamed down her face, indistinguishable from tears she refused to acknowledge. The street around her blurred into streaks of gray and gold beneath flickering streetlights. Cars passed in the distance, but none slowed. None noticed the woman standing perfectly still in the storm, as if she were part of the city itself, just another shadow in the rain. She could still hear his voice, calm, detached, explaining without emotion that things had changed, that he needed something different, that she should understand. And she had nodded, because that was what she had always done, understood, adjusted, made herself smaller so others could feel larger. But standing there now, she realized something he had never bothered to say. He hadn't left because she wasn't enough. He had left because leaving her was easy, and that truth settled into her chest like ice. She took a step forward, then another, not knowing where she was going, only knowing she couldn't stay there, couldn't remain in the exact place where she had been erased. The rain grew heavier, drumming against the asphalt, soaking her hair until it clung to her face, her vision narrowing with each breath. Her shoes slipped slightly on the slick sidewalk, but she didn't slow, didn't stop, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant feeling, and feeling meant breaking. And she was not going to break here, not where anyone could see. Even if no one was looking, a gust of wind cut through her, sharp and sudden, stealing the warmth from her skin, and for a moment, her knees threatened to give, but she forced herself upright, forced herself forward, each step mechanical, distant, as though her body were moving without her. And maybe it was. Maybe part of her had already stayed behind on that curb, abandoned along with everything else. The city stretched endlessly ahead, unfamiliar despite how well she knew it. Every light too bright, every shadow too deep, every sound muffled by the relentless rain. And then, without warning, headlights appeared, slicing through the storm. Too close, too sudden, the black car slowed, its engine low and controlled, not like the chaotic rush of traffic, but something deliberate, something precise. Emily barely registered it at first, just another vehicle passing through, another presence that would disappear as quickly as it came. But this one didn't pass. It stopped, directly in front of her, the engine idling with a quiet authority that didn't match the chaos of the rain. She hesitated, her breath catching for the first time since he had driven away. Something in her instincts stirring, something telling her this was different. The driver's door opened, slow, measured, and a man stepped out, tall, composed, his dark coat barely moving despite the wind, as if the storm had no claim over him. His face remained partially shadowed beneath the dim streetlight, but his presence filled the space between them in a way she couldn't explain. He didn't rush, didn't speak immediately. He simply looked at her. And that look was not casual, not curious. It was intentional, focused, as though he had been searching for something and had just found it. Emily felt it before she understood it, the weight of his attention, the way it settled over her like something tangible, something impossible to ignore. Her fingers curled slightly at her sides, her breath shallow now, uneven, the rain still falling, still relentless, but suddenly distant, as if the world had narrowed to just this moment, just this man standing in front of her. And then he spoke, his voice low, steady, cutting cleanly through the sound of the storm. "Get in." There was no question in it, no hesitation, just a statement, simple and final. Emily blinked, her mind struggling to catch up, to process the situation, to understand why a stranger would stop for her, why he would speak as though he already knew the answer. She should have refused, should have stepped back, should have said something, anything. But instead she found herself moving, drawn forward by something she couldn't name, her hand reaching for the car door before she fully realized what she was doing. The warmth inside hit her immediately, sharp against her chilled skin, and for a second she almost pulled back, almost returned to the rain where things made sense, where pain was familiar and expected. But then the door closed behind her with a soft, decisive click, sealing her inside, sealing the moment. And just like that, the world outside vanished. The rain became distant noise against the glass, the cold replaced by a quiet, controlled warmth. Emily sat there, frozen, her heart beginning to pound in a way it hadn't before, not from fear exactly, but from something deeper, something more dangerous. She turned her head slowly, meeting his gaze as he took his seat behind the wheel, his expression unreadable, his eyes steady on her as though nothing about this was unexpected, as though she had always been meant to sit there, in that exact moment. And then, after a long silence that seemed to stretch endlessly between them, he spoke again, softer this time, but no less certain. "I didn't save you." Emily's breath caught, her fingers tightening against the fabric of her dress as she tried to understand, to make sense of words that felt heavier than they should. His gaze didn't waver, didn't soften. If anything, it sharpened, deepening in a way that made her chest tighten. "I chose you." And something in the way he said it, something in the quiet finality of those words, made her realize that whatever she had just stepped into, whatever this was, it was not an accident, and the storm she had left behind was nothing compared to what was waiting for her now. The car did not move immediately, and that was the first thing Emily noticed, the stillness, the way the engine hummed quietly beneath them while the storm raged outside as if it belonged to another world entirely. She sat with her hands clenched in her lap, aware of every drop of water sliding from her hair onto the dark leather seat, aware of the silence stretching between them like something deliberate, something controlled. She should have spoken, should have asked where he was taking her, who he was, why he had stopped. But the questions felt small compared to the weight of his presence, compared to the way his words still echoed in her chest. "I chose you." It did not sound like kindness. It did not sound like chance. It sounded like a decision already made long before this moment. She swallowed slowly, her throat tight, her voice unfamiliar when it finally came. "Why?" It was barely more than a breath, barely strong enough to break the silence. But it was enough. His gaze shifted briefly to the road ahead, his hands steady on the wheel though they had not yet begun to drive, as if he were considering the question, or perhaps deciding how much of the answer she was allowed to hear. "Because you were still standing," he said at last, his tone even, controlled, as if stating a fact that required no further explanation. Emily blinked, confusion flickering across her face. She did not understand, not fully. There had to be more to it than that. But something in the way he said it made her hesitate, made her feel that pressing him further would not give her the clarity she wanted. Only more questions. The car finally began to move, smooth and effortless, pulling away from the curb as though the moment itself had been waiting for permission to continue. The city lights stretched and blurred against the rain-streaked windows, familiar streets slipping past. But the direction felt wrong, not toward anything she knew, not toward anything safe or predictable. She turned slightly in her seat, watching the passing buildings grow taller, darker, quieter, the noise of the city fading with every block, replaced by something more distant, more controlled. "You should not be here," she said after a moment, the words surprising even her as they left her lips. He did not respond immediately, but she saw the faintest shift in his expression, something that might have been amusement, or perhaps interest. "And where should I be?" he asked, his voice calm, but sharper now, as if testing her. Emily looked down at her hands, at the faint tremor she could no longer hide. "Anywhere that makes sense," she said quietly. "Not here, not with someone you do not know." The corner of his mouth moved slightly, not quite a smile, but close enough to unsettle her. "You think this does not make sense," he said, not as a question, but as an observation. She hesitated, then nodded, her honesty instinctive. unfiltered. "Nothing about tonight makes sense," she admitted, the words heavier than she expected. Heavier because they carried everything she had lost, everything that had been stripped away in a matter of minutes. The silence returned, thicker now, filled with unspoken thoughts. The car continued forward, the roads growing emptier, the buildings giving way to something else, something larger, more distant from the life she had known. Emily felt it then, the shift, not just in their surroundings, but in the air itself, as if she were crossing an invisible line she could never step back from. She turned to him again, studying his profile in the dim light, trying to understand what she had stepped into, who he was, what he wanted. "What is your name?" she asked, her voice steadier this time. His answer came without hesitation. "Sebastian," he said. Then after a brief pause, "Russo." The name settled into the space between them with a weight she could not quite explain. She did not recognize it, not directly, but something about it felt significant, as if it carried a history she had not yet been allowed to see. "Emily," she said softly, offering her own name without being asked. The exchange felt strange, almost formal, as if they were introducing themselves under circumstances that demanded more than simple politeness. Sebastian glanced at her briefly, acknowledging the name, but saying nothing more. The car turned onto a long, winding road, the city now completely behind them, replaced by darkness broken only by distant lights and the occasional outline of towering trees. Emily's chest tightened slightly, a quiet awareness settling in. This was not a place you stumbled into. This was not somewhere people arrived by accident. The gates appeared suddenly, tall, iron, opening without hesitation as the car approached, as if expecting them, as if he had been expected all along. Emily's breath caught, her fingers tightening against her dress, but she said nothing. The car moved forward, passing through, the gates closing behind them with a finality that echoed in her mind. The driveway stretched ahead, long and curved, leading toward a structure that slowly revealed itself through the rain, large, imposing, its windows glowing softly against the darkness. It did not feel like a home, not in the way she understood the word. It felt like something else, something built on control, on silence, on rules she did not yet know. The car came to a stop, the engine quieting, the world outside returning in fragments, the sound of rain, the distant wind, the faint hum of something unseen. Emily did not move immediately, her body tense, her thoughts racing, but her options felt limited, undefined. Sebastian stepped out first, his movements unhurried, certain, as if nothing about this moment was unfamiliar to him. He walked around the car, opening her door without a word, standing there, waiting, not forcing, but not leaving room for refusal either. Emily hesitated for a single heartbeat, then stepped out, the cold air hitting her again, though it felt different now, less biting, less overwhelming, as if something inside her had shifted, as if the storm no longer held the same power over her. She stood there, looking up at the house, at the lights that seemed too steady, too controlled compared to the chaos she had just left behind. "You can stay here," Sebastian said, his voice calm, measured, as if discussing something simple, something inevitable. Emily turned to him slowly, her brows drawing together. "For how long?" she asked, the question quiet, but firm. He met her gaze without hesitation, without softness. "Until I decide otherwise." The words should have frightened her, should have sent her running back into the storm, but they did not. Instead, they settled into her chest with a strange, unfamiliar weight, something between fear and something else she could not yet name, something that felt dangerously close to certainty. She looked back at the house, then at him, her voice steady when she spoke again. "And if I want to leave?" Sebastian did not answer immediately, his gaze holding hers, unyielding, unreadable. Then finally, quietly, he said, "You would not have gotten into the car." And somehow, she knew he was right. And that was the moment she understood. She had not just been brought here. She had crossed into something she had chosen without fully realizing it. And whatever waited inside that house, whatever he intended, whatever this connection was, it had already begun long before she ever stepped out into the rain. Emily did not realize how quiet the world had become until the door closed behind her, sealing her inside the house with a soft, deliberate click that echoed far louder than it should have. The storm remained outside, distant now, reduced to a muted rhythm against thick glass and stone walls. And for a moment she simply stood there, just inside the entrance, unsure if she was meant to move or wait. The air felt different here, warmer but not comforting, controlled in a way that made every breath feel observed, as though the house itself was aware of her presence. She became suddenly aware of everything at once: the faint scent of polished wood, the low glow of carefully placed lights, the quiet that did not feel empty but intentional. Like silence was part of the structure itself. Her shoes left faint damp marks against the pristine floor as she shifted her weight, unsure what to do with her hands, with herself, with the reality that she had. Followed a stranger into a place that did not belong to her world. Sebastian moved past her without urgency, his coat already removed and handed off to someone she had not noticed before, a man standing just far enough away to remain invisible until needed. Emily's breath caught slightly, her eyes flickering toward him, then toward the others who seemed to exist at the edges of the room, quiet, composed, watching without staring. There was no confusion in their movements, no hesitation, as if her arrival had not surprised them at all, as if she had been expected. That realization settled uneasily in her chest. She turned back toward Sebastian, her voice softer now, but edged with something more grounded than before. "You did not tell them I was coming." It was not quite a question, more an observation she did not fully understand. He paused, glancing over his shoulder at her, his expression unchanged. "I did not need to," he replied simply, then continued walking, leaving her with the weight of that answer and the unspoken implication behind it. Emily hesitated, her instinct telling her to remain where she was, to stay near the door, near the only exit she could still clearly see. But another part of her, quieter but stronger, pushed her forward. She could not stand frozen forever, could not pretend she had not already crossed a line she could not step back over. Her footsteps were soft as she followed him, the sound barely noticeable against the stillness. The hallway stretched ahead, lined with dark walls and subtle details she did not have time to fully take in. Everything here felt deliberate, measured, nothing out of place, nothing accidental, and she felt it again, that sense of control, not just in the space, but in him, in the way he moved through it as though it were an extension of himself. He stopped at the base of a wide staircase, turning to face her fully for the first time since they had entered, his gaze settling on her in a way that made her straighten without meaning to. "You are cold," he said, not as a question, but as a fact. Emily blinked, almost caught off guard by the simplicity of it, by the way it acknowledged something so obvious yet so easily ignored. She nodded slightly, though the words did not come immediately. "I am fine," she said after a moment, her voice quieter than she intended. He studied her for a second longer, as if weighing that answer, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod to someone behind her. Emily turned instinctively, noticing a woman stepping forward, her expression neutral but not unkind, holding a neatly folded set of clothes, dry, warm, unfamiliar. "You will change," Sebastian said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Emily looked down at herself then, truly seeing the state she was in, the water dripping from her sleeves, the way the fabric clung to her, the faint chill that had settled deep into her bones despite the warmth of the house. She hesitated only for a moment before taking the clothes, her fingers brushing against the soft fabric, something about the gesture both unsettling and strangely grounding. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words automatic, though she was not entirely sure what she was thanking him for: the rescue, the shelter, or the fact that he had already begun making decisions for her without asking. The woman gestured toward a nearby room, and Emily followed, her steps slower now, her thoughts catching up to her in fragments. The door closed behind her, leaving her alone in a space that felt no less controlled than the rest of the house. She exhaled slowly, setting the clothes down, her hands lingering on the edge of the surface as she steadied herself. This was real, all of it, the rain, the car, him, this place. She was not dreaming, not imagining, and yet nothing about it felt entirely solid, as if she were standing inside something that had not fully revealed itself yet. She changed quickly, the warmth of the dry fabric sinking into her skin, chasing away the last of the cold. but not the unease. Not the awareness that she had stepped into something far more complicated than she understood. When she stepped back into the hallway, everything looked exactly the same, as if nothing had shifted, as if time itself had paused while she was gone. Sebastian stood where she had left him, as though he had not moved at all, his eyes lifting to meet hers the moment she appeared. And for a brief second, something unreadable passed through his expression, not approval, not satisfaction, but recognition, as if he were seeing her more clearly now, not the woman in the rain, but the one standing in front of him, dry, composed, uncertain but still standing. Better, he said quietly. Emily held his gaze, something in her steadying, something in her refusing to shrink under the weight of his presence. What happens now? She asked, her voice calm, though her heart had begun to beat faster again. He did not answer immediately, and the silence stretched between them once more, but this time it felt different, heavier, more intentional, as if the answer mattered in ways she could not yet understand. He stepped closer then, not enough to invade her space, but enough to make the distance between them feel deliberate, chosen. Now, he said slowly, his voice lower, more precise. You stay? Emily's breath caught, not because of the words themselves, but because of the certainty behind them, the absence of doubt, the quiet authority that made it feel less like a suggestion and more like something already decided. She opened her mouth to respond, to question, to push back, but the words did not come, because somewhere beneath the confusion, beneath the uncertainty, there was something else, something quieter but stronger, a realization she could not ignore. She had already stayed the moment she stepped into his car, and whatever this was, whatever he had chosen, whatever she had stepped into, it was only just beginning. The word lingered in the air long after he said it. Not loud, not forceful, but final in a way that made Emily's chest tighten, as though something invisible had just shifted into place. You stay? It was simple, almost quiet, yet it carried more weight than anything else he had said so far. She felt it settle around her. Not like a command she could reject, but like a reality already unfolding. She held his gaze, refusing to look away even as her thoughts raced, trying to find something solid to hold on to, something that still belonged to her. You speak like it is already decided, she said. Carefully, her voice steady but edged with something sharper now, something that had not been there before. He did not react immediately, did not interrupt. He simply watched her, the silence stretching just long enough to make her question whether she should have spoken at all. Then, slowly, he nodded once, not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. It is, he replied, just as calmly as before, and there it was again, that certainty, that quiet confidence that did not need to raise its voice to be understood. Emily felt something stir in her chest, not fear, not exactly, but resistance. The kind that came from realizing someone else was trying to define the shape of her next step. She drew in a breath, steadying herself. You do not know me, she said, the words firm now, grounded in something she could claim as her own. You cannot decide something like that for me. For the first time, something in his expression shifted, not dramatically, not enough for anyone else to notice, but enough for her, a flicker of something almost like interest, as if she had said something he had been waiting to hear. You are wrong, he said quietly, and this time there was a subtle edge beneath the calm, something more precise, more deliberate. I know enough. Emily frowned slightly, confusion threading through her thoughts. Enough for what? She asked, her voice softer now, not weaker, but more focused. He stepped closer again, the distance between them narrowing in a way that felt intentional, controlled, never careless. Enough to know you did not leave, he said, each word measured, deliberate. You were left. The distinction hit harder than she expected, sharper than it should have, because it was true, and because he had said it without hesitation, without softening it, without pretending it was anything else. She felt her fingers curl slightly at her sides, the memory of the rain, of the empty street, of the car disappearing into the night pressing back into her mind. She swallowed, forcing the images away before they could settle too deeply. That does not mean I stay here, she replied, quieter now, but no less certain. He studied her for a moment, longer this time, as if weighing something she could not see. Then he turned slightly, his gaze shifting toward the room behind him. The movement small but deliberate. "Come," he said, not looking back at her, but expecting her to follow. Emily hesitated, just for a second, her instincts pulling in two directions, one urging her to step back, to hold her ground, to reclaim whatever control she still had, the other quieter, but persistent, reminding her that she had already crossed a line, already stepped into something she did not understand, and standing still would not change that. She exhaled slowly, then moved, her steps measured as she followed him deeper into the house. The space opened up into a larger room, warm light spilling across polished surfaces, the kind of room designed for presence, for conversations that carried weight, for decisions that mattered. A fire burned steadily in the distance, its glow soft but constant. Emily's eyes flickered toward it briefly, drawn by the warmth, by the contrast to the cold she had left behind. But even that felt controlled, contained. Like everything else here, Sebastian moved toward a table, pausing only long enough to pour a glass of water before setting it down in front of her. The gesture simple, almost ordinary, yet it felt anything but. Emily looked at the glass, then at him, uncertain what to make of the shift, the quiet offering after everything that had been said. "Drink," he said, and though his tone remained calm, there was no question in it. She hesitated for a moment, then reached for the glass, her fingers brushing against the cool surface, the water steadying in a way she had not expected. She took a small sip, then another, grounding herself in the simple act, in something that did not require understanding. When she set the glass down, she noticed he was watching her again, not with impatience, not with expectation, but with that same focused attention that made her feel seen in a way she was not used to. "You think this is about control?" he said after a moment, his voice quieter now, less sharp, more deliberate. Emily met his gaze, her expression guarded. "Is it not?" she asked. He considered that for a second, then shook his head once, slowly. "No," he said. "Control is something you take when there is resistance." His eyes held hers, steady, unyielding. "You walked into this." The words settled between them, heavier than before, because they carried a truth she could not easily dismiss. She had stepped into the car. She had followed him inside. She had not turned back, not even once. Emily's breath caught slightly, her mind searching for something to push against, something to argue. But the reality was there, undeniable. She had chosen something. Even if she did not fully understand what it was. "That does not mean I belong here," she said finally, her voice quieter, but still holding on to that last piece of herself she could define. Sebastian did not respond immediately, and for a moment she wondered if he would at all. Then he stepped closer, stopping just within reach, not touching, but close enough that the space between them felt charged with something she could not name. His voice, when he spoke, was lower now, more precise. "Not yet," he said, and the words sent a subtle chill through her, not because they were threatening, but because they were not. They were certain, calm, as if he were describing something that would happen whether she agreed or not. Emily's heart began to beat faster, her thoughts tangling between doubt and something else, something unfamiliar. She held his gaze, refusing to look away, refusing to let whatever this was pull her completely under. "And if I decide I do not want that?" she asked, the question softer now, but no less important. He did not hesitate this time. "Then you will try to leave," he said simply, "and you will learn why you stayed." The answer was not forceful, not threatening, but it carried a weight that settled deep, something that made her realize this was not a game, not a misunderstanding, not something that would fade with time. This was something deliberate, something chosen, something already in motion. Emily felt the air shift again, the quiet pressing in around them, the fire flickering softly in the background, the storm now nothing more than a distant memory beyond the walls. And for the first time since she stepped out of that rain, she understood one thing clearly. She had not been taken. She had stepped into something that had been waiting for her, and whether she stayed or tried to leave, whatever this was, it was not going to let her remain unchanged. The silence that followed his words did not feel empty. It felt like something tightening, something drawing inward until there was no space left for anything uncertain. Emily stood there, still, her pulse echoing louder than the quiet around them. His voice remained in her mind, calm, certain. "Not yet," It was not a threat, and somehow that made it more unsettling, because it meant he was not forcing anything. He was waiting, and waiting required confidence, the kind that came from knowing the outcome before it happened. She exhaled slowly, forcing her shoulders to relax, forcing her thoughts into something sharper, something she could hold on to. "You speak like everything is already written," she said, her voice steadier now, not defensive, but deliberate. He watched her for a moment, then moved past her toward the window, his gaze shifting to the darkness beyond the glass. The storm had softened, the rain no longer relentless but steady, controlled, like the house itself had absorbed its chaos and reduced it to something quieter. "Not everything," he replied after a moment, his tone even, thoughtful in a way she had not heard before. "Only the parts that matter." Emily frowned slightly, stepping closer, not enough to close the distance entirely, but enough to feel less like she was standing outside the conversation. "And I matter," she said, not as a question, but as something she needed to hear said out loud. He turned his head just enough to look at her, his expression unreadable, but his answer came without hesitation. "You would not be here if you did not." The simplicity of it unsettled her more than anything else he had said, because it did not feel like flattery. It felt like a statement of fact, something decided long before she had any say in it. Her fingers tightened slightly at her sides, the last traces of uncertainty shifting into something else, something firmer. "You said you chose me," she continued, her voice quieter now, more focused. "Why?" This time, she did not let the question drift away. She held it there, between them, refusing to let it dissolve into silence. Sebastian did not answer immediately, his gaze lingering on her, not avoiding, not dismissing, but measuring, as if deciding how much of the truth she was ready to hear. He stepped away from the window then, moving back toward her with that same controlled ease, every step intentional, never rushed, never uncertain. "Because you did not ask him to stay," he said finally, the words landing softly but with precision. Emily blinked, caught off guard, her mind replaying the moment she had tried to push away, the empty street, the rain, the absence. She had not begged, had not reached for him, had not chased after the car as it disappeared. She had simply stood there, and then walked away. She swallowed, her voice quieter now, almost cautious. "That is not a reason," she said, but even as the words left her lips, she felt the weight of them falter. He tilted his head slightly, as if considering her response, then shook it once, slow, deliberate. "It is the only reason," he replied, his voice lower now, more precise. "Most people hold on to what is already gone." His eyes held hers, steady, unyielding. "You did not." Something in her chest tightened at that, not from the memory itself, but from the way he had seen it, from the way he had turned something she had not even fully understood into something significant, something worth noticing. Emily looked away for a brief second, her thoughts shifting, rearranging, trying to understand what he was saying, what he was implying. When she looked back at him, her expression had changed, not softer, not weaker, but more aware. "You were watching," she said, the realization settling into her voice before she could stop it. His gaze did not shift, did not deny it. "Yes," he answered, simple, direct, and the confirmation sent a quiet ripple through her. Not fear, not panic, but something deeper, something more complex. "For how long?" she asked, her voice steady despite the way her pulse had begun to rise again. He considered the question for a moment, then answered without hesitation, "Long enough." It was not the answer she wanted, not the clarity she had been hoping for, but it was enough to understand one thing. This had not been random, not chance, not coincidence. Something had been unfolding long before she ever stepped into that rain. Emily felt the room shift around her, not physically, but in the way she understood it, in the way she understood him. She took a small step back, not in retreat, but to create space, to think, to breathe. "You made a decision about me without asking me," she said, her voice calm now, almost too calm, as if she were testing the shape of her own words. Sebastian watched her closely, as if this was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment where she would finally see what he had already accepted. "No," he said quietly, and this time, there was something different in his tone, something sharper, more grounded. "I recognize the decision you had already made." Emily's breath caught. slightly, the words settling into her in a way she could not immediately push away. She had walked away. She had not begged. She had not held on. She had stepped into his car. She had followed him inside. Each step had been hers. Even if she had not fully understood it at the time, her gaze dropped briefly, her thoughts racing, then lifted again, clearer now, more focused. "And what happens when I make a different one?" she asked. Her voice steady, deliberate. Sebastian stepped closer again, the space between them narrowing just enough to feel intentional, never overwhelming. His presence calm but undeniable. "Then everything changes," he said, and there was no hesitation in it, no doubt, just certainty. Emily held his gaze, searching for something she could use, something she could define, but there was nothing unclear in his expression, nothing uncertain, only that same quiet confidence that had followed her from the moment he stepped out of the car. The fire behind him flickered. Softly, the light casting shifting shadows across the room. And for a moment, she saw it. Not just the control, not just the certainty, but the patience, the willingness to wait for something to unfold exactly as it was meant to. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing, not in surrender, but in acceptance of something she could not yet fully name. "Then I suppose we will see," she said quietly, and for the first time, there was something in her voice that matched his, something steady, something certain, something that did not retreat. Sebastian's gaze lingered on her for a moment longer. Then he nodded once, a small, almost imperceptible acknowledgement, as if something had just aligned in a way. Neither of them needed to explain. The silence returned, but it no longer felt heavy, no longer uncertain. It felt like the beginning of something neither of them would walk away from. Not now. Not after everything that had already been set in motion. And as Emily stood there, no longer the woman left in the rain, but not yet the one he had chosen, she understood one thing clearly. Whatever this was, it was not about being taken or saved. It was about what happened when two decisions, made in silence, collided at exactly the right moment. The quiet between them did not break. It deepened, settling into something steady, something that no longer needed to prove itself. Emily felt it in the way her breathing slowed, in the way her thoughts no longer raced to escape, but instead began to turn inward, searching, understanding. She had said they would see, and for the first time since the night had begun, she meant it, not as a defense, not as resistance, but as a choice, and something in him had recognized that. She saw it in the slight shift of his posture, the way his attention remained fixed on her, not demanding, not pressing, simply present, as if waiting for what she would do next mattered more than anything he could say. The fire behind him continued to burn with a quiet consistency, its warmth reaching her in slow waves, soft against her skin, grounding her in a space that no longer felt entirely foreign, but not yet familiar either. She glanced toward the window for a moment, the rain now a steady rhythm instead of a storm, and it struck her how quickly everything had changed, how a night that had begun with loss had somehow led her here, standing in a place she could not have imagined, with a man she did not understand. And yet, she had not turned away. That realization settled into her more firmly now, not as a question, but as something she could no longer ignore. "If I stay," she said slowly, her voice measured, testing the shape of the words as they left her, "it will not be because you decided it." Her gaze lifted to meet his, steady, unwavering. "It will be because I choose it." The statement hung between them, not defiant, not challenging, but clear, grounded in something she was only beginning to understand about herself. Sebastian did not respond immediately, but something in his expression shifted, not in surprise, not in resistance, but in recognition, as if this was the answer he had been waiting for, not the words themselves, but the certainty behind them. He nodded once, slow, deliberate. "Then choose," he said, and there was no pressure in it, no urgency, just an open space, one she could step into or walk away from. And for the first time, the decision felt real, not something already written, not something decided for her, but something that belonged to her entirely. Emily drew in a breath, deeper this time, allowing herself a moment to feel it fully, the weight of everything she had left behind, the uncertainty of everything ahead, the strange, undeniable pull of the present. She looked around the room again, not as a stranger now, But as someone standing at the edge of something unknown, the walls no longer felt suffocating, the silence no longer pressing. Instead, it felt like a pause, a space where something new could begin. She turned back to him, her expression calmer now, clearer. "I stay," she said quietly, and the words did not feel forced, did not feel uncertain. They felt right in a way she could not explain, like a step taken without hesitation, like a door closing behind her not with regret, but with intention. Sebastian held her gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow too. Just that connection, that quiet understanding that passed between them without needing explanation. "Good," he said simply, and though the word was small, it carried something more, something settled. Something final in a way that did not feel limiting, but grounding. Emily felt it then. The shift, not around her, but within her. The subtle but undeniable realization that she was no longer standing at the edge of this moment. She was inside it, part of it. And whatever came next would not be something she was pulled into. It would be something she stepped into willingly. Sebastian turned slightly, his movement smooth, unhurried, as if the decision had already set something else in motion. "Come," he said again, but this time it felt different. Not an expectation, not an instruction, but an invitation into whatever came next. Emily followed without hesitation, her steps steady, her thoughts quieter now, no longer fighting against the unknown, but moving with it. They walked through another hallway, deeper into the house, the space shifting subtly, becoming more private, more contained, until they reached a door that opened into a room unlike the others, simpler, softer, designed. Not for presence, but for rest, for stillness. Emily paused at the threshold, taking it in, the warmth, the quiet, the sense of separation from everything beyond it. "This is yours," Sebastian said, his voice calm, as if stating something that required no further explanation. Emily looked at him, then back at the room, the word "yours" settling into her thoughts in a way she had not expected. It felt unfamiliar, almost distant, and yet there was something about it that grounded her, something that made the space feel less like a place she had entered and more like a place she could exist within. She stepped inside slowly, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of a nearby surface, the texture solid, real, anchoring her in the moment. When she turned back toward him, he was still standing in the doorway, his presence unchanged, steady, watchful. "You are not asking me to stay in here," she said, her tone curious, not guarded. He shook his head once. "No," he replied. "You will. Decide where you stand." The answer surprised her, not because of what it meant, but because of how simply he said it, as if control was not something he needed to enforce, but something he allowed to unfold. Emily studied him for a moment. The layers of who he was still unclear, still out of reach, but no longer entirely unknowable. "You are not what I expected," she said quietly, the words slipping out before she could stop them. Something in his expression shifted again, subtle, almost unnoticeable. "Neither are you," he replied, and for a moment, something passed between them, something that was not tension, not uncertainty, but something quieter, something that did not need to be defined yet. Emily exhaled softly, turning back into the room, stepping further inside, her decision no longer something she questioned, but something she had already made. And as the door remained open behind her, as his presence lingered just beyond it, she understood something she had not before. This was not the end of the night, not the resolution of anything. It was the beginning of something far more complex, something that would not reveal itself all at once. And for the first time, she was not afraid of that. She was ready to see what it would become. The door remained open longer than Emily expected, and for a moment she stood still in the center of the room, aware of his presence behind her, not moving, not speaking, simply there, as if giving her time to decide whether this space would truly become hers or remain just another place she passed through. She did not turn immediately, not because she was avoiding him, but because she needed to feel the room without distraction, to understand what it meant to stand inside something that had been offered without condition. The quiet settled around her, softer here, less deliberate than the rest of the house, the faint hum of distant movement barely reaching her, as if this place existed just slightly apart from everything else. She let out a slow breath, her shoulders easing, the tension that had followed her since the rain finally beginning to loosen its hold. When she did turn, he was still there, exactly where she had left him, his gaze steady, unreadable, but not distant, not detached. "You are still here," she said quietly, not surprised, but aware. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the observation without elaborating. "For now," he replied, and there was something in the way he said it that made her pause, something that suggested his presence was not something she should expect without reason. Emily stepped closer to the doorway, stopping just short of crossing back into the hall, the distance between them small but deliberate. "You said I would decide where I stand," she said, her voice calm, her thoughts clearer than they had been before. "Does that include where you stand?" The question was subtle, but it carried weight, a test she had not fully intended to make until the words were already spoken. Sebastian regarded her for a moment, then stepped forward, closing the distance just enough to stand within the threshold, not entering the room, not retreating into the hall, but holding that exact point between spaces. "It does," he said, his voice low, precise, "but I do not stand where I am not wanted." Emily felt the words settle into her, unexpected in their simplicity, unexpected in what they implied. She had expected certainty from him, control, decisions made without hesitation. But this was something else, something that left space for her in a way she had not anticipated. She held his gaze, searching for something beneath the surface, something that would explain why a man like him would draw a line there. But there was nothing unclear in his expression, nothing hidden, only that same steady presence that had followed her from the moment he stepped out into the rain. "And if I ask you to stay," she said, her voice quieter now, more deliberate, the question not about testing him anymore, but about understanding what this moment meant. He did not answer immediately, but something in his posture shifted, not in tension, not in hesitation, but in attention, as if the answer mattered in a way nothing else had so far. "Then I stay," he said, simply, without emphasis, without weight beyond the truth of it. Emily felt her breath catch slightly, not from surprise, but from the clarity of it, the absence of conditions, the lack of complication. It was not a promise, not a declaration, just a response, grounded and certain. She looked away for a brief moment, her thoughts aligning in a way they had not before. She had stepped into this willingly. She had chosen to stay, and now she was being given something she had not expected, the ability to define the space between them, to decide what it meant. She turned back to him, her expression steady, her voice calm. "Then stay," she said, and the words did not feel uncertain, did not feel like a risk. They felt like a continuation of the decision she had already made, something that extended beyond the moment into whatever came next. Sebastian did not move immediately, but something in his gaze changed, softened in a way that was almost imperceptible, as if a line had been crossed not by him, but by her, and it mattered more than anything he could have done himself. He stepped into the room then, fully this time, the boundary between them shifting without resistance, without hesitation, and yet the space did not feel smaller, did not feel crowded. It felt intentional, balanced. Emily became aware of it instantly, the difference between being followed and being joined, the subtle shift that changed everything without needing to be explained. She moved toward the window, her fingers brushing lightly against the glass, the cool surface grounding her as she looked out into the fading rain. The night stretched beyond the property, distant, quiet, no longer threatening, no longer something she needed to escape from. "This place," she said after a moment, her voice softer now, almost thoughtful. "It feels like it was waiting." Sebastian did not respond right away, and when she glanced back at him, he was watching her again, not the room, not the space, but her, as if her understanding of it mattered more than anything else. "It was," he said finally, and there was no hesitation in it, no attempt to soften the truth. Emily turned fully then, her brows drawing together slightly. "For what?" she asked, and this time, there was something different in her tone, not uncertainty, not doubt, but curiosity, a willingness to see what lay beneath the surface. Sebastian stepped closer, stopping just a few feet away, his presence calm but undeniable. "For the right moment," he replied, and though the words were simple, they carried something more, something that reached beyond the room, beyond the night. into something she had not yet fully grasped. Emily felt it then, the shift not just in him, but in everything around them. The sense that this was not the beginning of something random, but the continuation of something that had been building long before she ever realized it. She exhaled slowly, her thoughts settling into a quiet clarity. "And you believe this is that moment," she said, her voice steady, grounded. He held her gaze, unflinching. "I know it is," he answered, and the certainty in his voice did not feel like pressure, did not feel like control. It felt like recognition, like something undeniable finally being seen for what it was. Emily stood there, the weight of everything settling into her. The rain, the car, the choice, the space between them now closed not by force, but by decision. And for the first time, she understood that this was not something she had been pulled into. It was something she had stepped toward, something she had chosen without realizing it. And now, standing in that room with him, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever this was, whatever it would become, it was no longer just his decision. It was hers too. And that changed everything. The room seemed to settle around them in a way that felt almost aware, as if the space itself had acknowledged the shift that had just taken place. Emily remained by the window for a moment longer, her fingertips resting lightly against the cool glass, watching as the last traces of rain slid down in quiet lines, no longer violent, no longer demanding, just present, like an echo of something that had already passed. She could still feel it in her bones, the cold, the emptiness of that street, the silence he had left behind, but it no longer held the same weight. Not here, not now. She exhaled slowly and turned back toward Sebastian, her movements unhurried, deliberate, as though she had finally found a rhythm that matched the one he had been moving in all along. He had not stepped closer again, had not filled the space between them. Instead, he remained where he was, giving her room without stepping away, a balance she was beginning to notice, to understand. "You said this place was waiting," she said quietly, her voice thoughtful, less guarded now. He inclined his head slightly, his gaze steady on her. "Yes," he answered, and the simplicity of it only deepened her curiosity. Emily took a step forward, then another, closing part of the distance on her own terms, her posture calm but intent. "Places do not wait," she continued, her tone soft but certain. "People do." The words hung between them, and for a moment, the silence that followed felt heavier, not uncomfortable, but filled with something unspoken, something just beneath the surface. Sebastian watched her carefully, and for the first time since she had met him, there was a pause that did not feel calculated, as if she had reached something he did not offer easily. "You notice more than most," he said after a moment, his voice quieter now, not defensive, not dismissive, just acknowledging. Emily held his gaze, her expression steady. "I have had to," she replied, and though she did not elaborate, the weight of it was there, in the way her voice did not waver, in the way her eyes did not look away. Something passed through his expression again, subtle, but present, as if her answer had confirmed something he had already believed. "Then you already understand," he said, stepping closer this time, not abruptly, not forcefully, just enough to shift the air between them. Emily did not step back, did not retreat. Instead, she remained where she was, meeting him in that space, allowing the distance to close without surrendering her ground. "No," she said softly. "I understand that you are not telling me everything." There was no accusation in her tone, only observation, only clarity, and that seemed to matter more than anything else. Sebastian's gaze did not break, did not falter. "Not yet," he replied. And there it was again, that phrase, that sense of something unfolding in stages, something that would not be revealed all at once. Emily felt a small shift in her chest, not frustration, not impatience, but something quieter, something closer to acceptance. She nodded slightly, as if acknowledging a rule she had not agreed to, but was willing to understand. "Then tell me this," she said, her voice steady, her eyes searching his. "When you saw me tonight, what did you see?" The question lingered, heavier than the ones before, because it was not about what had happened, but about how he had perceived it, how he had perceived her. Sebastian did not answer immediately, and for a moment she thought he might not answer at all. But then he stepped closer again, stopping just short of reaching her, his voice lower now, more precise. I saw someone who did not break, he said, each word measured, intentional. Emily's breath caught slightly, the simplicity of it cutting deeper than she expected. She had felt like she was breaking, standing there in the rain, everything inside her unraveling quietly, invisibly. But he had not seen that. Or perhaps he had seen something else entirely, something she had not recognized in herself. You were left, he continued, his gaze unwavering. And you did not chase what was already gone. Emily felt the words settle into her, heavier than before, not because they were new, but because she was beginning to understand what they meant to him, why they mattered. Most people would have begged, he added, his tone calm, almost detached. You did not. She swallowed slowly, her thoughts shifting, rearranging. The memory of that moment no longer something she pushed away, but something she looked at differently now, through his eyes, through the way he had interpreted it. And that was enough, she asked quietly, her voice softer now, not challenging, but seeking clarity. He held her gaze for a long moment before answering. It was everything. The words landed with a quiet finality, and for a moment, neither of them moved, neither of them spoke, the silence stretching between them not as a barrier, but as something shared, something understood without needing to be explained. Emily looked down briefly, her fingers brushing lightly against the fabric of her sleeve, grounding herself in the present, in the reality of where she stood. When she looked back up, something in her expression had shifted, not softer, not weaker, but more certain, more aware of the weight of her own presence in this moment. You chose me because I walked away, she said, her voice calm, steady. He nodded once. Yes, she exhaled slowly, the realization settling deeper now, becoming something she could not ignore, something she could not dismiss as coincidence or impulse. Then what happens if I walk away again? She asked, and this time, the question was not about the past, but about the future, about what this connection meant, about what it would demand. Sebastian did not hesitate, did not look away, his answer immediate, unwavering. You will not, he said, and there was no force in it, no command, just certainty, the kind that did not need to be proven. Emily felt her heart beat faster, not from fear, but from the weight of that certainty, from the way it seemed to reach beyond the moment into something she could not yet fully see. She held his gaze, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for anything that might soften the edge of his words. But there was none, only that same quiet confidence that had followed her from the very beginning. And for the first time, she understood something she had not before. This was not about holding her here, not about keeping her from leaving. It was about something deeper, something that had already taken root the moment she made her choice. She stepped closer then, closing the last of the distance between them, her voice steady, her eyes clear. You are very certain, she said softly, and this time, there was no challenge in it, no resistance, only recognition. Sebastian's gaze softened, just slightly, just enough for her to see it. I am, he replied, and in that moment, standing there with the storm behind her and the unknown ahead, Emily realized that certainty did not feel like a cage. It felt like something else entirely, something she was only beginning to understand, something that was no longer just his, but hers as well. The air between them held a different kind of weight now, not the sharp tension of uncertainty, but something steadier, something that did not need to prove itself. Emily felt it in the way her breathing remained calm, even as her heart moved faster, in the way she did not step back even though every instinct she once had might have told her to. His certainty no longer felt like pressure. It felt like a mirror, reflecting something she had not fully seen in herself until now. She tilted her head slightly, studying him more carefully, not as a stranger anymore, but as someone who had made a deliberate place for her in his world. You speak like you already know me, she said, her voice quiet but clear, not defensive, not hesitant, just honest. Sebastian did not answer right away, his gaze steady, unwavering, as if he were measuring the meaning behind her words rather than the words themselves. I know what matters, he replied finally, and the simplicity of it carried more weight than anything more elaborate could have. Emily frowned slightly, not in confusion, but in thought. And what is that? She asked, her voice softer now, almost curious in a way she had not allowed herself to be before. He stepped closer. Again, closing the remaining distance until the space between them felt intentional rather than empty. That you do not hold on to what cannot stay, he said, each word measured, precise. And you do not run from what does. Something in her chest tightened at that, not from fear, not from resistance, but from recognition, because he was not entirely wrong. She had walked away, and she had stepped forward, both choices hers, both moments shaping something she was only now beginning to understand. She exhaled slowly, her gaze dropping for a brief second before lifting again, clearer now, more grounded. And you think I will not run from this, she said, not challenging, not questioning, but testing the truth of it. Sebastian's expression did not change, did not soften or harden. It remained exactly as it had been from the start, calm, certain, unshaken. No, he said, and there was no hesitation, no doubt, just that same quiet conviction that seemed to define everything about him. Emily felt a flicker of something rise in her chest, something that might have been defiance once, something that might have pushed her to prove him wrong, but it did not fully form. It did not take shape the way it once would have. Instead, it settled into something else, something quieter, something more thoughtful. You are very sure of that, she said, her voice softer now, not resistant, not defensive, just aware. He inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the observation without expanding on it. I do not guess, he replied, and the words, though simple, carried a finality that left little room for doubt. Emily turned slightly, moving away from him just enough to create space, not distance, just room to think, to feel the shape of everything settling into place around her. Her fingers brushed lightly against the edge of the table, grounding herself in something solid, something real, because everything else still felt like it existed just beneath the surface of something she had not yet fully grasped. Then tell me something you do not know, she said after a moment, her voice steady, deliberate. And this time there was something new in it, not uncertainty, not hesitation, but intention, as if she were shifting the balance in a way that mattered. Sebastian watched her closely, and for the first time, there was a pause that felt different, not calculated, not controlled, but genuine, as if the question had reached a place he did not easily reveal. What you will do next, he said finally, and there was something quieter in his voice now, something that did not diminish his certainty, but added something else to it, something almost like openness. Emily felt the shift immediately, subtle but undeniable, and something inside her responded to it, something that had been waiting for that exact moment. She nodded slightly, as if acknowledging the answer, as if understanding what it meant without needing it explained further. Then watch, she said softly, and before the moment could settle into stillness again, she turned and walked past him, not quickly, not abruptly, but with a calm, steady purpose that felt entirely her own. She moved through the doorway, into the hallway beyond, her steps measured, her posture relaxed but certain. She did not look back immediately, did not check if he followed, because for the first time, she did not need to. She already knew he would, not because he had to, not because he was controlling the situation, but because this was no longer something one-sided. It was something shared, something unfolding between them in ways neither of them had fully defined yet. She paused at the end of the hallway, her hand resting lightly against the wall as she turned her head slightly, just enough to catch the faint shift of movement behind her. And there he was, exactly as she expected, not rushing, not calling out, simply following at the same measured pace, as if her decision had set the direction without needing to be spoken. Emily allowed a small breath to escape her, not quite a smile, but close enough to feel the difference. You follow easily, she said, her tone light but thoughtful. He stopped a few steps behind her, not closing the distance completely this time, allowing the space to remain, to exist without pressure. I do not follow, he replied, his voice calm, steady. I move with what matters. Emily turned fully then, facing him again, her expression clearer now, more certain than it had been at any point before. And I matter, she said, not asking, not testing, just stating something she was beginning to accept. He held her gaze, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow again, everything else fading into the background, leaving only the space between them, only the quiet understanding that had been building since the moment they met. You do, he answered, and this time, There was no distance in it, no restraint, just truth, simple and undeniable. Emily felt it settle into her, deeper than before, stronger, not as something given, but as something she had stepped into, something she had chosen. And as she stood there, no longer questioning whether she would stay, but beginning to understand why, she realized that whatever this was, whatever it would become, it was no longer something she was trying to escape. It was something she was walking toward, one step at a time, on her own terms. And that made all the difference. The hallway seemed different now, not because anything had changed, but because Emily had. The quiet no longer pressed against her. It moved with her, shaping itself around each step she took. She stood facing him, the distance between them no longer uncertain, no longer undefined, but intentional, chosen. And for the first time since the night began, she felt something settle inside her, something steady, something that did not shift with every word he spoke. She had asked him to watch, and he had, not with control, not with interference, but with that same unwavering attention that had followed her from the very beginning. She took a slow breath, her fingers relaxing at her sides, no longer bracing for something unknown, but preparing for something she was beginning to understand. "You said you do not guess," she said quietly, her voice carrying easily through the stillness. Sebastian did not move, did not interrupt, his gaze fixed on her as if nothing else existed beyond this moment. "Then tell me what you were waiting for," she continued, her tone steady, deliberate. He tilted his head slightly, not in confusion, but in acknowledgement of the question, as if he had been expecting it. "I am not waiting," he replied, and the answer came without hesitation, without doubt. Emily frowned faintly, a small crease forming between her brows. "Then what is this?" she asked, her hand gesturing lightly between them, not in frustration, but in clarity, in the need to define something that had grown beyond simple understanding. Sebastian took a step forward, closing part of the distance, but not all of it, leaving space for her to remain exactly where she was. "This is movement," he said, his voice calm, measured. "You moved first." Emily felt the words settle into her, and for a moment, she saw it from his perspective. The rain, the silence, the choice to walk away, the decision to step into his car, to follow him into this place. She had moved, not once, but repeatedly, and each step had led her here. She exhaled softly, her gaze dropping for just a second before lifting again, clearer now, sharper. "Then I will keep moving," she said, and there was something new in her voice, something that did not question, did not hesitate, something that simply existed. Sebastian watched her closely, and for the first time, there was a shift in his expression that she could not fully define, something quieter, something that did not change his certainty, but added to it, deepened it. "Then show me," he replied, and the words did not sound like a challenge. They sounded like an acknowledgement, like an invitation to continue what had already begun. Emily nodded slightly, not because she needed his permission, but because she understood the moment, understood that this was no longer about proving anything. It was about stepping forward without hesitation. She turned again, her steps steady as she moved further down the hallway, deeper into the house, not searching, not wandering, but choosing, each step deliberate, each movement grounded in something she was beginning to trust within herself. The space opened into another room, larger than the last, with tall windows and soft lighting that cast long shadows across the floor. She paused there, taking it in, not as a guest, not as someone unsure, but as someone deciding what this place meant to her. Her gaze moved slowly across the room, noting the details without being overwhelmed by them. The quiet strength of the space, the way everything felt designed but not forced. She stepped further inside, her fingers brushing lightly against the back of a chair, grounding herself once more. Then she turned, looking back toward him. He stood at the threshold, not entering immediately, not claiming the space, but waiting, allowing her to define it first. And that was when she understood something she had not before. This was not about control, not in the way she had expected. This was about recognition, about seeing what she would choose when she was given the space to choose it. "You do not enter unless I do," she said softly, the realization settling into her voice. He inclined his head slightly, confirming without needing to say it outright. Emily held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "Then come in," she said, her tone calm. Certain, and the moment the words left her, he stepped forward, crossing the threshold without hesitation, but without force, as if the space itself had shifted to allow him in. Emily felt the difference. Instantly, not in the room, but in herself, the awareness that she had allowed this, that she had defined this moment. She turned away again, walking toward the center of the room, her posture relaxed, her thoughts no longer scattered, but aligned. She stopped there, standing still, allowing the silence to settle once more, but this time it did not feel like something waiting to be filled. It felt complete. She glanced back at him, her expression clear, grounded. "You said you know what matters," she said, her voice quieter now, but carrying weight. "Then know this." She paused, not because she was unsure, but because she was choosing her words carefully, shaping them into something that belonged to her. "I am not here because I had nowhere else to go." Her gaze held his, steady, unwavering. "I am here because I chose to be." The words settled into the space between them, firm, undeniable, and for a moment, nothing moved. Nothing shifted, as if the room itself had recognized the truth. In what she said, Sebastian did not respond immediately, but when he did, his voice was quieter than before, more precise. "I know," he said, and there was something different in it now, something that did not just acknowledge her choice, but respected it. Emily felt it then, the final shift, the moment where uncertainty gave way to something else entirely, something grounded, something real. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing as the last remnants of tension faded, and as she stood there, no longer questioning why she was here, no longer uncertain about what this meant, she realized that whatever came next, whatever this became, it would not be something she was pulled into. It would be something she continued to walk toward, step by step, with him not ahead of her, not behind her, but moving with her in a way that changed everything. The stillness in the room no longer felt like something waiting to be filled. It felt complete, shaped by the choices that had just been made. Emily stood in the center of it, grounded in a way she had not been before, her words still lingering between them, not as a challenge, not as something that needed to be defended, but as a truth she had claimed for herself. She watched him carefully now, not searching for control, not bracing for resistance, but observing, understanding, the way his presence adjusted to hers rather than overtaking it, the way he remained steady without pressing forward, as if the balance between them had become something deliberate, something neither of them intended to break. She let out a slow breath, her shoulders easing fully this time, the last trace of tension slipping away. "Then there is something you should understand too," she said, her voice quiet but clear, not sharp, not guarded, but certain. Sebastian's gaze did not waver, his attention fixed on her in that same unwavering way that had followed her from the beginning. "Say it," he replied, and the simplicity of it gave her space rather than pressure. Emily nodded slightly, her thoughts aligning with a clarity that felt unfamiliar and yet entirely her own. "I do not belong to anyone," she said, the words steady, deliberate, shaped by everything she had just walked away from, everything she had just chosen. Not before, not now. She held his gaze, unflinching, letting the meaning settle without softening it, without reshaping it to make it easier to accept. For a moment, the silence that followed felt different, not heavy, not uncertain, but charged with something deeper, something that mattered. Sebastian did not respond immediately, but something in his expression shifted, not in contradiction, not in resistance, but in recognition, as if what she had said was not something he needed to challenge, but something he had already considered. "Good," he said finally, his voice lower now, more precise. "Then do not." The answer was not what she expected, not what she had prepared herself for, and that alone made her pause, her brows drawing together slightly as she studied him more closely. "That is not what I thought you would say," she admitted, her tone softer now, more thoughtful than before. He tilted his head slightly, not dismissing her observation, but acknowledging it. "You think I want ownership," he said, not as a question, but as an understanding of her expectation. Emily did not answer immediately, but her silence was enough to confirm what had been left unspoken. Sebastian stepped closer then, not closing the space entirely, but enough to shift the air between them again. I want presence, he continued, his voice calm, unwavering. Ownership demands something that can be taken away. His gaze held hers, steady, deliberate. Presence does not. The words settled into her, deeper than she expected, reshaping something she had not fully understood about him, about what had brought her here. She exhaled slowly, her thoughts shifting, not in resistance, but in understanding. And you believe I will choose to be present, she said, her voice quieter now, not questioning, but acknowledging the implication. He did not hesitate, did not look away. You already have, he answered, and the certainty in it did not feel imposed. It felt observed, as if he were simply stating something that had already happened, something she had already proven. Emily felt a flicker of something move through her chest, not doubt, not hesitation, but awareness, because he was not wrong. She had stayed, she had stepped forward, she had defined the space instead of retreating from it. She looked away briefly, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the table once more, grounding herself in the present. When she looked back at him, her expression had shifted again, not softer, not more guarded, but clearer, more aligned with what she was beginning to understand about herself. Then I will decide how I am present, she said, her voice steady, deliberate. Sebastian inclined his head slightly, accepting without question, without condition. That is the only way it matters, he replied, and something in the way he said it made her realize that this was not a negotiation, not a power struggle, but something else entirely, something that required both of them to step forward without trying to define the other. The silence returned again, but it no longer felt like something that needed to be broken. It felt like something that held everything in place, something that allowed the moment to exist fully without being rushed or reshaped. Emily turned slowly, her gaze moving across the room once more, but this time she saw it differently, not as a space she had entered, but as a space she was beginning to shape, to define in her own way. She walked toward the far side of the room, her steps calm, unhurried, and stopped near one of the tall windows, the night beyond it quiet now, the rain reduced to a faint trace against the glass. She rested her hand lightly against the frame, her reflection faintly visible. Not the same woman who had stood in the rain hours ago. Not the same woman who had stepped into a car without knowing where it would take her. But someone else, someone more aware, more certain. She turned back toward him, her expression composed, grounded. You said you do not guess, she said softly, and there was a faint hint of something new in her tone, something almost like a quiet challenge. Then do not guess this. She paused for a moment, choosing her words carefully, not because she was unsure, but because she understood their weight. I am not here to be saved. The words were not sharp, not defensive. They were simply true. Sebastian's gaze did not shift, did not falter, but something in it deepened, as if he had been waiting for that exact statement. I know, he replied, his voice steady, certain. You are here because you chose not to be lost. Emily felt the words settle into her, heavier than before, not because they were unexpected, but because they aligned with something she had not fully put into words until now. She held his gaze, the quiet stretching between them once more, but this time it felt like something shared, something understood without needing to be explained further. And as she stood there, no longer questioning what this was, no longer resisting the shape it was taking, she realized something she had not before. This was not about him defining her, and it was not about her resisting him. It was about something in between, something that required both of them to step forward without losing themselves, and that was something she had never experienced before, something she was only beginning to understand. And as the night continued to unfold around them, she knew one thing with absolute clarity. Whatever this became, it would not be something either of them could walk away from without changing. And for the first time, that did not feel like something to fear. The quiet that followed her words did not break. It expanded, filling the space between them with something deeper than silence, something that no longer needed to be spoken aloud to be understood. Emily remained by the window, her hand still resting lightly against the frame, her reflection faint against the glass, but it was no longer the reflection that held her attention. It was the feeling beneath it, the steady awareness that she had crossed something she could not return from, not because she was trapped, not because she had been pulled in, but because she had chosen to move forward without looking back. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders easing as the last trace of resistance left her body, not replaced by surrender, but by clarity. She turned again, her gaze finding Sebastian exactly where she expected him to be. Unchanged, steady, watching her with that same quiet intensity that no longer unsettled her the way it had before. "Then there is something else you should know," she said, her voice calm, even, not guarded, not defensive, but deliberate. He did not move, did not interrupt, his attention fixed entirely on her, giving her the space to continue without pressure. Emily took a step forward, closing the distance slightly, not because she had to, but because she chose to. "I do not stay in places that try to keep me," she continued, her tone softer now, but no less certain, the words shaped by everything she had experienced, everything she had left behind, everything she had refused to become. Sebastian's gaze did not shift, but something in it deepened, not in challenge, not in contradiction, but in acknowledgement. "Then do not," he replied, and the simplicity of it caught her off guard again, not because she expected resistance, but because she expected something more complex, something layered, something that required negotiation. But there was none of that, only a response that met her statement without trying to reshape it. Emily studied him for a moment, her expression thoughtful, searching not for weakness, not for control, but for understanding. "You make it sound simple," she said quietly, and there was a faint trace of something new in her voice, something almost like disbelief. He tilted his head slightly, considering her words. "It is," he said, his voice low, steady. "People complicate what they do not trust." Emily felt the truth of that settle into her, not immediately, not completely, but enough to recognize that there was something in it she could not dismiss. She looked down briefly, her fingers brushing lightly against the edge of the window frame, grounding herself in the present, then lifted her gaze again, clearer now, more focused. "And you trust this," she said, not questioning, but observing. He did not hesitate. "I trust what I see," he replied, and the answer was as simple as everything else he had said, but it carried weight, because it was not based on assumption, not on expectation, but on something he believed had already been proven. Emily took another step forward, closing the distance further, until they stood only a few feet apart, the space between them no longer uncertain, no longer undefined, but intentional. She held his gaze, her expression steady, her thoughts aligned. "Then what do you see now?" she asked, her voice quieter, but carrying a weight that made the question feel more important than any before it. Sebastian did not answer immediately, and for a moment, the silence stretched again, but it did not feel empty. It felt measured, as if he were choosing his words with precision rather than withholding them. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower, more deliberate. "I see someone who is not leaving," he said, and the certainty in it did not feel imposed. It felt observed, as if he were simply stating something that had already taken shape. Emily felt a subtle shift in her chest, not resistance, not defiance, but recognition, because she knew he was not entirely wrong. She had not left, she had not stepped back, she had continued forward, step by step, choice by choice, and each one had brought her here. She exhaled softly, her gaze dropping for a moment before lifting again, clearer now, more grounded. "Not yet," she said, and the words were not a contradiction, not a rejection, but a boundary, a truth she needed to hold on to. Sebastian inclined his head slightly, accepting the distinction without argument. "Not yet," he echoed, and the agreement settled between them, not as a compromise, but as a shared understanding. Emily felt it then, the balance, the way neither of them was trying to force the other into something defined, the way both of them were allowing something to unfold, without rushing it, without controlling it. She stepped closer again, until the space between them was no longer defined by distance, but by intention, her voice steady when she spoke again. "And if that changes," she said, her tone calm, deliberate. "If I decide to leave," she held his gaze, not challenging, not testing, but needing to understand the shape of what this meant beyond the moment. Sebastian did not hesitate this time, his answer immediate, unwavering. "Then you will," he said, and there was no resistance in it, no attempt to hold her in place, only a statement that acknowledged her ability to choose. Emily felt something shift at that, something she had not expected, Not relief, not reassurance, but something deeper, something that made her realize that this was not about being kept, not about being held in place. It was about something else entirely, something that existed because she chose to remain, not because she was unable to leave. She nodded slightly, her thoughts settling into a quiet clarity. Then this is not what I thought it was, she said softly. And there was no uncertainty in her voice now, only understanding. Sebastian's gaze softened just slightly, not enough to change the intensity of it, but enough for her to notice. No, he said. It is not. The words did not define what this was, did not place it into something familiar or expected. But that was exactly what made them feel real. Emily exhaled slowly, her shoulders relaxing fully. The last traces of tension gone, replaced by something steadier, something that did not shift with every word or movement. She turned slightly, her gaze drifting back toward the window, the rain now barely visible, reduced to faint lines against the glass. The storm that had brought her here, now nothing more than a memory. She let out a quiet breath, then turned back to him one final time, her expression calm, certain. Then I will stay, she said. And this time, the words were not a reaction, not a continuation of what had already been decided. They were something new, something chosen again, consciously, deliberately. And that made all the difference. Sebastian held her gaze, and for a moment, nothing else existed beyond that connection, beyond the quiet understanding that had formed between them. I know, he said, and there was no doubt in it, no question, just certainty. But this time, it did not feel like something he had decided. It felt like something they had both arrived at together. And as the moment settled around them, Emily understood something she had not before. This was not about being found, not about being taken, not even about being chosen. It was about what happened when she chose herself, and someone else recognized it without trying to take it away. And that was something she had never experienced before, something she was only beginning to understand, something that would change everything that came next. The moment did not end when she said it. It settled, deeper, quieter, as if the house itself had absorbed her choice and reshaped itself around it. Emily stood where she was, the words still lingering in the space between them, not fragile, not uncertain, but grounded in something that no longer needed to be questioned. She had said she would stay, not because she had nowhere else to go, not because she had been convinced, but because she had chosen it again, consciously, and that difference changed everything. She could feel it in the way her breathing remained steady, in the way her thoughts no longer searched for an exit, but instead began to settle into what was in front of her. Sebastian did not move immediately, did not break. The quiet that followed, his gaze holding hers with that same calm certainty. But there was something different in it now, something that did not press forward, did not define, but simply remained, as if the need to prove anything had disappeared the moment she made her choice. Emily let out a slow breath, her shoulders relaxing fully as the last trace of tension left her body. The night no longer felt like something she had survived. It felt like something she had stepped through, something that had led her here for reasons she was only beginning to understand. She turned slightly, her gaze drifting toward the window once more. The rain now reduced to faint streaks against the glass, the storm completely gone, leaving behind a stillness that felt almost deliberate, as if the world outside had quieted to match what had settled inside her. It is strange, she said softly, her voice thoughtful, not directed at him as much as it was at the moment itself. How something can end and begin at the same time. Sebastian stepped closer then, not enough to close the distance entirely, but enough to stand beside her rather than across from her, his presence shifting from something she faced to something that moved with her. It is not strange, he replied quietly, his voice lower now, less defined by certainty and more by something else, something that felt closer to understanding. Most people just do not notice when it happens. Emily glanced at him, her expression calm, reflective. I noticed, she said, and there was no hesitation in it, no uncertainty, just truth, because she had felt it. The moment something ended in the rain, and the moment something else began when she chose not to turn back. Sebastian inclined his head slightly, acknowledging the weight of her words, not adding to them, not reshaping them, just letting them exist. The silence that followed felt different again, not empty, not waiting, but complete, as if nothing more needed to be said to confirm what had already taken shape. Emily rested her hand lightly against the window, her reflection faint beside his now. Two figures standing side by side, not merging, not overshadowing, but existing within the same frame. The image held something she had not expected, something steady, something balanced. She studied it for a moment, then turned away, stepping back into the room, her movements unhurried, her thoughts clear. What happens now? She asked quietly, not because she needed direction, but because she wanted to understand how this would move forward, not just for him, but for her. Sebastian watched her carefully, and for the first time, there was a pause that did not feel like control, but consideration, as if he were choosing his answer not to shape her path, but to align with it. Now, he said slowly, his voice measured. You live here as you choose. The words settled into the space between them, simple, direct, and yet they carried something more, something that did not limit her, but expanded what this place could become for her. Emily held his gaze, her expression steady, absorbing the meaning behind his words. And you, she said, her voice softer now, not questioning, but defining. Where do you stand in that? Sebastian did not look away, did not hesitate. Where you allow me to, he replied. And the answer, though simple, shifted something again, not because it gave her control, but because it confirmed that this was not something he intended to take without her choosing it. Emily felt a quiet understanding settle into her, deeper than before, something that did not need to be explained, because she could feel it, the balance, the space. The way this was not something that would be forced into a shape, but something that would grow into one over time. She nodded slightly, more to herself than to him, her thoughts aligning with a clarity she had not known before. Then I suppose we will both find out, she said, her voice calm, certain, and for the first time, there was something in it that matched his, not in tone, not in presence, but in the quiet certainty of it. Sebastian's gaze softened, just slightly, enough for her to see the shift. We will, he replied, and the words did not carry expectation, did not carry pressure. They carried something else, something closer to trust. The silence returned once more, but it no longer felt like something that needed to be broken. It felt like something that held everything together, something that allowed the moment to exist fully without being rushed into something else. Emily turned toward the door. Then, her steps slow, deliberate, not leaving, not retreating, but simply moving, testing the space, the choice, the reality of what she had decided. She paused at the threshold, her hand resting lightly against the frame, and for a moment, she looked back at him, not searching, not questioning, just seeing him as he was, as he had been from the beginning, steady, certain, but now something more, something that did not stand against her, but alongside her. You said you chose me, she said, quietly, her voice carrying easily through the stillness. Sebastian met her gaze without hesitation, without shifting. I did, he replied. Emily held his gaze for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, not in agreement, not in surrender, but in acknowledgement of what that had meant, of what it had started. Then understand this, she continued, her tone calm, grounded. I chose this too. The words settled into the space between them, final in a way that did not close anything, but opened everything. And for a moment, neither of them moved, neither of them spoke, because nothing more needed to be said. The truth of it was already there, already understood, and as Emily turned away again, stepping fully into the space she had claimed as her own, she understood something with complete clarity. This was not the end of anything, not a resolution, not a conclusion. It was the beginning of something that would unfold slowly, deliberately, shaped not by force, not by expectation, but by choice, her choice, his recognition, and the quiet understanding that neither of them would walk away unchanged. And somewhere in the stillness of that realization, something deeper took root, something that did not need to be named yet, something that would reveal itself in time. And for the first time, she was not afraid to see what it would become.